Welcome to this episode of the Buzzin the Tower podcast. I'm your host as always. My name is Brian, and this is part 3 of the 1994 Strike Series that I've been working on a little bit, where I sort of do what could have been with some of the guys who are having a giant season that got cut short, unfortunately, in 1994 because of the strikes. So if this is your first time jumping in, I do have 2 previous ones where I broke down my favorite player growing up in Kirby Puckett, and also the best pitcher of that era, and Greg Maddux. So also go check those out on my YouTube page or on SoundCloud, or if you want to find it on Twitter, Facebook, all the above. Let me know what you think. But today we're jumping into the guy they called the Big Hurt, Frank Thomas. Certainly one of the most feared hitters of the 90s and early 2000s. Just a big, intimidating-looking dude at the plate. And I think a lot of us played Big Hurt baseball back in the day on the old Sega Genesis and all that, but I mean, you talk about an all-around hitter. We're talking about a guy who not only hit for power, but hit for average, took walks, and it was just in 1993 and 1994 was completely dominant. And I mean, even throughout most of his White Sox career. So we're gonna break down, his 1994 getting cut short, just like the previous guys. So a little what could have been, but. If you haven't already, follow me on Facebook, subscribe to YouTube, subscribe to SoundCloud, whatever floats your boat. Please comment, share, like, all the above. Any assistance is much appreciated. So we're going to do a quick background here on Frank. He was drafted 7th overall in 1989. He was actually not picked out of high school in 1986, which is kind of amazing. If you think of a guy that big and strong, probably hitting the ball a mile in high school for him to not get found. He must have, flown under the radar a little bit, but he did not fly under the radar in football because he actually ended up signing on to play tight end at Auburn. So that tells you what kind of an athlete he is to be that big and strong, but also, good enough to play tight end in the SEC. So it must be rough to be that talented. But so yeah, he gets drafted in 1989. Didn't spend a lot of time in the minor leagues. He debuted August 2nd in 1990 with the White Sox. So he moved right on up, and that's when, not too much later on, Hawk Harrelson famously gave him the nickname the Big Hurt because he put a big hurt on the ball. So he was a 5-time All-Star, 4-time Silver Slugger, 2-time Most Valuable Player of the American League, and he entered the Hall of Fame in 2004. Was actually kind of surprised he was only a 5-time All-Star. It seems like with the overall numbers he put up, it seems like he had a huge peak of his career, which he had 2 of those seasons get cut short by the strike. But like I said earlier, the 2 years he was the MVP in 1993 and 1994, I mean, he's the best hitter in the American League for sure. I mean, even with Griffey involved, because the overall walks versus strikeouts versus on base, all the above, Frank Thomas was dominant. And, he won the MVP in 93. He hit 41 homers, 128 runs batted in. He had an OPS of 1.033, which is phenomenal. And in that MVP season, that was in 153 games, which those are fantastic numbers over any stretch of a season, 162, 100 and whatever. So, I mean, 41 homers, that's a whole mess of homers there. But the next season, in 1994, like we've talked about in the previous ones, he got cut to 113 games, hit 38 homers still. So in exactly 40 less games, he only hit 3 less homers. He drove in 101 runs still. And then he also led the league in on-base percentage at 487, which is unbelievable. So basically, he's almost getting on base 1 out of every 2 times he walks up there. His slugging percentage also led the league at .729. And so the stat OPS I referenced earlier is on base plus slugging. So a .729 slugging is ridiculous because a .729 on base plus slugging is about league average in most years. So you add in a league-leading on base percentage. Obviously, he had a 1.217 OPS that year, which is unbelievably good. Also led the league, of course, and then led the league with 106 runs scored in only 113 games. So it tells you the kind of pace that he was on in 1994. In terms of his OPS, there's a stat called OPS Plus, which kind of balances that across the rest of the league, and it puts it on a scale of 100. So exactly 100 on an OPS Plus is league average. Frank Thomas put up an OPS Plus of 212 that year. So he was 112% better than the league average, which is obviously, you talk about the era he was in like one of the main parts of the steroid era. I mean, to be 112% better than everybody else just shows you the kind of season he was having that, once again, unfortunately got cut short. But fortunately for us, we're able to look at that on sort of an all-time perspective, despite the fact that it was cut short. So in terms of OPS plus, his mark of 212 was actually the 15th best season of all time in the American League. Now, you might think, okay, he was the 15th best batter. No, actually, there's only 4 guys ahead of him. They just had multiple seasons ahead of him. Some names you might have heard of. Babe Ruth, Ted Williams, Mickey Mantle, and Lou Gehrig were the only 4 people with better seasons of an OPS plus than Frank Thomas in 1994. On top of that, his on-base percentage of .487 among qualified AL hitters, once again, only behind 3 guys, Ted Williams, Babe Ruth, Mickey Mantle. His is still the highest since 1957 as well. So, I mean, it's insane how often he was getting on base, even if you can consider that one of the best offensive eras ever. People were just, not only were they walking him often, when they were pitching to him, he was doing damage. It wasn't just slapping it into right field. You think of like a Tony Gwynn, the guy with the high on-base percentage, where he's getting a bunch of hits, getting on base. But people just, it was more of a Barry Bonds treatment than anything. Like before the big Barry Bonds thing, people were just terrified to pitch to Frank, and he wasn't going to go up there and expand his strike zone. And I think that that just shows what kind of a hitter he was. But the one guy I think of in more modern times that probably compares to Frank Thomas in terms of position and sort of body type and dominance is Albert Pujols. That's a name that people might recently know, and he certainly is probably considered the best right-handed hitter of the last 15 to 20 years. I mean, there's outside of Mike Trout now, but in terms of longevity, I mean, Pujols has kind of been the guy for a while. So what I did was I took Frank Thomas's 1994 and weighed those against the best seasons for each of these stats by Albert Pujols. So when you talk about the career Pujols has had, he'll be a first ballot slam dunk Hall of Famer. And we're talking about all of his seasons. He has a chance to beat these numbers in any season. But this is just Frank Thomas in 1994. So I ran a few numbers here. Walk percentage. Albert Pujols' career high was 16.4%, which is ridiculously high. Frank Thomas in 1994, his walk rate was 21.1%. Home run percentage. Albert Pujols' career high, 7.7%. Frank Thomas, 7.4%, so pretty close there. At bats per home run, Albert Pujols' career best, 10.9. And Frank Thomas's best is 10.5, so Frank Thomas was actually slightly better there in just the one season. There's also home run per fly ball percentage. So what percentage of the balls you hit in the air leave the yard? So that's kind of a display of just pure power and be able to get that backspin and drive the ball. Albert Pujols career high 18.6%. Frank Thomas in 1994 19.9%. So basically, Frank Thomas was having a better statistical season. If you took all of Albert Pujols' best seasons and kind of rolled it into one, it still wasn't as good as what Frank Thomas did in 1994. So I found that to be pretty wild. And once again, I keep saying it, but I can't believe it got cut short. It's tough as a baseball fan to know, would he have gone into a slump or whatever. But I mean, you're able to put the numbers next to a guy like Albert Pujols that shows you what Frank Thomas was doing in 1994. On top of that, so I was able to extrapolate those numbers out and sort of put them over a 162 game pace. Frank Thomas was on pace for 54 home runs, 144 runs batted in, and 156 walks. So in the history of Major League Baseball, there's only that would have been the fourth instance where there's been 50 plus homers and 150 plus walks. The other 3 being Babe Ruth in 1920, Mark McGwire in 1998 when he was on an entire cabinet from wherever, from GNC, and then Barry Bonds in 2001, who was basically a Balco test subject. So you got one Babe Ruth season and 2 seasons that are legendary, but are also with huge question marks. So, I mean, 50 homers and 150 walks, like I said earlier, it's being patient, but when it does come through the zone, that means he's doing damage. So it's pretty crazy, the numbers he was putting up. But the other tool I do like to use is the one from Baseball Reference, where you can sort of neutralize it over different eras. So in certain run scoring environments, like 1994 is obviously one of the best run scoring environments there was. But you can take it and kind of put it against a modern day 2018 American League, and his numbers are still unbelievable. They would be most likely a hands down MVP season. So moving his 1994 season to a 162 game American League season in 2018. Frank Thomas would have hit 333, 465 on base, 688 slugging for a 1.15 OPS, which is unbelievable. For more traditional stats, that would have been also 50 home runs, 126 runs batted in, and 142 walks versus 87 strikeouts. So, I mean, the guy just, every time he went up to the plate was basically doing damage, or 1 out of 2 times was getting on at least. So, if you can kind of measure those numbers against what the guys like Trout and JD Ramirez and Jose Ramirez or JD Martinez, excuse me, Jose Ramirez, those kind of guys are doing. It's unbelievable what he had going, but once again, we'll never know. Now, there's a big debate about designated hitters in the Hall of Fame, and some guys like Edgar Martinez seem to somehow get lost in the shuffle, despite the fact that. So this is kind of extrapolating on Frank Thomas here. Frank Thomas was a Hall of Famer, got in like 2004, like I said, but he actually spent 50+% of his career as a designated hitter. And as a first baseman, he had the worst defensive WAR of anybody in the league in the 7 years he played first base. So it's kind of indicative that Frank Thomas was athletic, but he wasn't in the Hall of Fame because of his glove. And so that's where I did write an article a couple years ago about designated hitters trying to get in the Hall of Fame. So it's kind of funny to me that Frank made it in. I mean, he strictly got in for his bat. And it's not his fault the rule was there. He probably still could have played first base. Same with Edgar Martinez. You don't know. But I think for a guy like Edgar Martinez to not be in, you can't say he wasn't one of the best hitters of an entire era. You even think of like a guy like Mike Piazza getting in. Mike Piazza got in. It took him a couple tries on the ballot, but you can't tell me Mike Piazza's in because he was raking in gold gloves or setting any kind of records with his gloves. So I think, in my humble opinion, I think that more designated hitters should be in. I say that while also thinking that either both leagues need to have the DH or neither. And as a purist, I kind of lean towards neither. But while the rule's in place, I don't think guys should be penalized. Like you look at David Ortiz is going to be coming up. You can't tell me that guy didn't have a huge impact. Now, he might not get in because of potential, steroid or PED allegations, but it should be interesting moving forward. The ballot keeps getting more and more diluted because of the steroid era guys that are kind of hanging out and getting 50% of the votes, that people are standing in the mud and saying, yes, I'll vote in a Barry Bonds, or no, I won't. So I hope Edgar gets in this year. I'm glad Frank got in. Obviously, if you think of the 90s, especially the mid-90s, there's nobody, maybe him and Griffey, probably the two most feared guys at the plate. So tell me what you guys think about designated hitters or Frank Thomas, or if there's anybody else you want me to break down from 1994. I'm always open to suggestions. I was hoping to be able to do these a little more frequently, but I'll just keep cranking these out when I can. But please comment, like, share, all the above. Everything helps. I appreciate you guys tuning in, but we'll see you again soon.